Hola,
Hola, ¿cómo está?
¿quién va a ir a la radio?
Hoy día,
Ah,
hoy día la profesora no
no va,
pudo,
va a avisar, pero ¿quién va de nosotros?
va Silvia.
¿Ya fue? ¿Se fue?
Iba a ir un poco más tarde,
Ya,
porque digamos tuvo que correr todos los horarios, más o
ya,
menos.
sí,
Sí,
porque podría irse con un auto de la escuela.
claro,
Están los españoles acá, se dan todos
claro.
juntos.
Le digo
Y después
que
nos llevan al hotel.
por 10
Welcome back to the afternoon sessions. Before we continue with the presentations, we would like to remind you that each speaker has 12 minutes for their presentation. When there is 1 minute remaining, we will let them know so they can wrap up. After both speakers have finished, there will be a 6-minute session for questions and answers. We kindly ask everyone to be mindful of the time, as once the sessions conclude, we must move on to the next block. We would like to welcome Javi Ribedi, who is going to present Plastic Pollution is an Emerging Environmental Threat in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. Welcome, Javi.
Thanks, Diego. I'll just share my screen and please let me know if that's not visible. Okay. Hopefully that works. Can somebody let me know if that's visible?
Yes, we can see the presentation and we hear very well.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. All right. Good morning, everyone. I am tuning in from Tasmania in Australia. It's about 6 a.m., so I'm a little bit sleepy, but I'll do my best. My name is Beb Pavi, and I'm a PhD candidate here. And today I'm presenting on the topic of plastic pollution is an emerging environmental threat in the Antarctic region. So to begin with, I actually really wanted to show this quote from my research that I got from one of the interviews I did, because this really sums up the presence of plastic pollution in the Antarctic region from back in the 1990s. This person that I interviewed was talking about how they disentangled about 100 Antarctic fur seals per summer back in the 1990s. So this presence of plastics in the Antarctic region can be attributed to at least 40 years ago. And this is something that I realized we don't talk about enough, because it almost seems like plastics are a new problem, but even in the Antarctic region, they've been around for a while now. So quickly just looking at pathways and sources of this pollution, a lot of it indirectly is attributed to the oceanic currents. And I apologize, I don't know why the photo isn't showing up, but it was just showing a microplastic strand. So indirect pollution coming in through oceans and also atmospheric transportation is something that we do know about now in the recent times. But the direct sources of pollution that is increasingly coming into light include all the research stations that exist on the Antarctic continent. Currently, there's about 70 different research stations that are operated by 30 different countries. And the way they use plastics includes packaging, construction material, and also just through laundry when people wash their clothes, because clothes end up having a lot of microplastics as well. And right now, there's no such consensus on whether or not there's microplastic filters that need to be put into place in the Antarctic research centers. The other source is tourism, which increasingly, as most of you probably know, is becoming a bigger concern for environmental reasons. This also includes plastics because there's a lot of times that plastics are being used in clothing again, but also in the ships, there's stuff that gets overblown that can never be retrieved. And also the gray water that comes out of these tourist ships is not regulated at all, which means that whatever microplastics go through regulated through gray water will end up in the environment. And the third one is the fishing industry. So almost everything used by the fishing industry to actually fish is made of plastic. And although the fishing industry is sort of liable to go back and try to collect plastic nets or equipment that gets that may be broken or if it's thrown overboard, that's not always possible because of the environmental conditions of the region. So because it's really cold and it's oftentimes an expensive procedure to go back and collect stuff, that's not always being done either. So that's another direct source currently. So the reason I brushed past all of that is because my work mostly focuses on the governance. So looking at the different responses through CAMLR, it did establish a marine debris program back in the 1980s, late 1980s, just because that was the time when there was a lot of sightings of seals that are being caught up were coming into place. So when different countries brought this up to CAMLR, they decided to establish a marine debris program, which basically is looking at doing surveys in mostly subantarctic region. So these surveys then tell us how much marine debris is washing up on the shores of the subantarctic islands. And then there was, back in the 1990s, there were conservation measures that were, the one that was adopted was banning plastic packaging bans and mandating that these plastic packaging bans be incinerated on board before anything else can happen to them. So trying to make sure that plastic packaging bans that end up in the water and oftentimes entangle the wildlife can be stopped. So this image that I put out here, which is overboard is not forgotten, is something that CAMLR came up with. And they mandated this to be put out into different kinds of shipping vessels, but they also tried to translate it into different languages. So more and more people were able to just look at these images and understand why plastic packaging bans should be cut or incinerated. So that was one of the conservation measures that were put in place. And then the same conservation measure was then expanded on in 2008 to adopt water discharge prohibitions. So wastewater and waste that was being put into the water as well. And then that was pretty much it until 2019, when CAMLR also expanded the conservation measure to be in consistence with the IMO shipping measures, which means plastic discharges were completely restricted in the entire convention area. So this has been the response from CAMLR so far. And another thing to note when it comes to the marine debris program and trying to understand how much plastics can be found or how much plastics are sometimes thrown overboard, the industry people are supposed to report back, but just to note that is voluntary. Okay, So looking at what the Antarctic Treaty Consultative meetings have done, so the first resolution that talked about plastic pollution came out in 2019. So there were no resolutions before that. There were information papers and background papers that were talking about the issue. But the first resolution came out only in 2019, and it was titled Reducing Plastic Pollution in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. And it did provide 5 key recommendations that included eliminating all sorts of microbeads in personal care products. So this, think about like facial scrubs and stuff. So people were not supposed to take anything that had microbeads down there. And then also to include sharing knowledge on reducing microplastics from wastewater systems, improving plastic pollution monitoring in the region, and requesting SCAR to report on plastic pollution levels and ecosystem risks. So just on that, SCAR does have an expert group dedicated to plastic pollution right now. But we are currently still in the early phases of trying to figure out what is it that needs to be done next. And the last recommendation the 2019 resolution provided was to include microplastic release in future revisions of the environmental protocol, the 2 annexes that talk about plastics and also waste. And this is really interesting because this 2019 resolution also noted that most plastics found in Antarctica originate from outside the region. That was interesting because just this year, there was another resolution that was passed in the 47th meeting, so 2025, which was titled Towards Ending Plastic Pollution. This is a really interesting shift from the last one because now we're no longer talking about reducing plastic, but actually moving on to trying to talk about ending plastic pollution in the Antarctic region. So this, even though it builds on the 2019 resolution, it does also go a step further and recognize that human activity in Antarctica is actually a localized source of plastics. And it no longer says that most plastics are coming from outside the region, which is really interesting shift as well. So some of the governance challenges, and I know this is a lot in a short time, there are really no enforceable measures. There's only recommendations. So the resolutions are not legally binding. They are, again, resolutions or just recommendations. And CAMLR only really functions on fishing vessels, which means that it's more marine debris than any source of plastic that comes from land. There is honestly no plastic management consistency when it comes to the different national Antarctic programs. So that's something which is also lacking currently. We don't have a lot of scientific data as well. There's no standardizations on how data is collected from that region. There's no enforceable restrictions on visitors, only guidelines that are provided by the industry body IARO. There are no legislations that prohibit discharge of untreated gray water that comes from different vessels. So this is all the kitchen waste and stuff like that. There's very limited interactions with other global institutions when it comes to the Antarctic Treaty System, and enforcement remains a huge challenge as well. So some of the future directions and solutions that I have come up with through my work include strengthening cooperation between science and policies. We do need more data on this issue. We also need to talk a bit more about what sort of policies will help. So that needs to be done a bit more. And also think about developing a regional plastics monitoring framework, including all the sources of plastics that are coming from land, so from the continent itself, because if you remember, I was mentioning how there are 70 different research stations. So if we can have a plastics monitoring framework, that will give us the data to implement better policies on. Developing best practices between all the national Antarctic programs is another one that I think needs to be done. And of course, banning all single-use plastics. This is currently not a practice, but banning every single-use plastic from ever going down to Antarctic region is a good step as well. And integrating Antarctic findings into the Global Plastics Treaty discussions. I didn't talk about the Global Plastics Treaty as much, but I am happy to take up questions on it later. But if we are able to integrate some of the information coming out from polar regions, including the Antarctic, into these discussions, because currently there are none, I think that'll also provide a good platform. And I'm just checking time here. All right, and a quick note, as a lot of stuff here is currently my work that's not published, so I do ask that you don't take screenshots of this. Yeah, I think that's time. So I will stop sharing my screen now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vaihabi. And now we continue with Hannah Yepchun with the power of not saying yes objections without justification in Antarctic conservation politics. Welcome, Hannah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Let me just share the screen. Okay. Please let me know if anyone see the presentation.
Yep.
Hello, Hannah. We can see it perfectly and we hear you
Hi,
well.
thanks. Great. Okay, thank you so much. So, hello, everyone. I'm Hannah Yepchun. I'm polar ecologist from National Antarctic Scientific Center of Ukraine, and I'm currently based in Chile. And I would like, before I start, just to mention briefly what this presentation is going to be about and what is not. So it is kind of an invitation to discuss of the topic that is quite sensitive and yet very relevant recently. It is an opportunity to think how we can improve and enhance the system of making decision in the area of Antarctic specially protected areas. So it's not a statistical report, at least for now, and I will not mention any names and to be as much objective as possible. So let's start. In general, recently, cooperation on designating new Antarctic specially protected areas, which I will call in further ASPA, has been productive. However, over the last year, some troubling tendency of unclear concerns by particular countries have emerged. And I would like to focus on those concerns raised that delayed the decision-making process, because of course there are many concerns that are okay, that are absolutely normal, because the protected area management plans, they are being developed, elaborated, and so on. However, some concerns, they prevented the, let's say, fast decision-making process enabling conservation of these vulnerable areas, while being selective or vague, which is unclear. So to do that, I analyzed the ATSM reports for the last 15 years, and which is from 2010 to 2025. Most of you, I'm sure, knows how the Antarctic conservation policy works, but just to briefly mention, because it is important in terms of the topic. So we have 58 parties. Half of them are consultative parties in the Antarctic Treaty, which means they can make decisions, they have this right. They also can ban, or let's say, prevent some decision from making, because all these decisions, are based on the consensus approach. So the system, it is a very simple scheme that I present here. It's like the tree, right? The roots of the tree is the basis of the Antarctic Treaty system, which is Antarctic Treaty itself and Madrid Protocol. And institutional system works to manage all these things based on this Antarctic Treaty and Madrid Protocol. The institutional systems are ATSM, which is Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting, and CEP. So the Committee of Environmental Protection. They work using, let's say, these 5 most popular mechanisms, but I will mention just one of them, which is ASPA. So how the Antarctic Specially Protected Area designation process goes, it starts from submitting the preliminary assessment form or draft management plan. It's not necessary to submit the preliminary form, but the countries do this. Then it goes to CEP, the Committee of Environmental Protection. It gives some, let's say, maybe considerations, advices. They work on the paper, gives recommendations to the countries to improve, for example. And if there are some additional work necessary, they forward it to the subsidiary group on management plans, which is CSGMP. And if everything is okay and there are no other concerns, it goes to the ATSM, to the designation. However, in this particular moment, even if everything was absolutely fine with the management plan, the designation process can still be blocked by concern of even one country. So what I noticed in the recent years, on this graph, you can see the blue bars, which is number of ASPA adopted, and this red line, which is the concerns of the countries that prevented adoption of the Antarctic protected areas. So, and we can see that for some reason, we don't know yet why, it's not the topic of this presentation. However, since 2020, approximately, the number of concerns which prevented adoption of Antarctic protection area, specially protected areas, they exceeded the number of ASPAs being adopted. So this tendency, if it continues, it's quite concerning itself. And what is troubling, let's say, troubling tendency is that even while some concerns were justified and explained, many of them were unclear or even contradicted the previous ASPA adoption practice. They can be divided into two groups. That's my division, regulatory concerns and database concerns. Let's take a look at them. So if previously in regulatory concerns was okay to use the phrase, this ASPA is adopted for preventing unnecessary human disturbance or presence, then recently the very same phrase was used as the reason to block some initiative. You can see this on the right side of the slide. The next one, prohibited and restricted zones were absolutely okay in the Antarctic protected areas. And not all of them used this conception, but some of them used, and it was okay. However, recently, some parties, they objected against creating prohibited zones in some ASPA. Also, big ASPAs was absolutely okay previously, while recently increase in less than 4 square kilometers became the issue, as well as multi-site ASPA. Well, there were ASPAs with 4 or 7 sites in one ASPA. However, recently, the 4-site ASPA has raised concerns. The second group is data-based concerns. Previously was okay not to specify, for example, the population size of the complete species list for the particular area, or it was only mentioned that the area hosts only several rare species. However, recently there were concerns like there is not enough data, or there is lack of representativeness for the area, and so on. Or, for example, a single geomorphological value of the area was enough previously. However, now we have cases where some parties raise concerns about that core values are unclear, which is unclear itself, right? The concern that doesn't specify anything is unclear, and it's not possible to overcome such concern potentially. So here is the table of what I think, it's just my personal thoughts, that what could be done with that to improve the ASPA decision-making process. So if we have the problem with vague objections when there are no clear justification of the objection party, then these perhaps, I'm not the lawyer, however, this is from my experience of working with the protected areas and from the experience of the colleagues that I worked with. Perhaps it is possible to overcome if we use some mandatory objection justification form so that scientists are involved in this process of objecting, not just the representatives of the parties who are often not scientists. Also, the same category of issues is no measurable standards for designating the ASPA. So what is enough? How many species, for example, is enough to protect 1 to 100? There are no clear criteria right now for Antarctica. So we need this clear scientific criteria. For example, the minimal necessary monitoring years, or the requirements for species data, the clear rarity criteria for species, and so on. And let's say if the forward justifications is not submitted by the objecting party, this objectant should not be valid, for example. Otherwise, the decision-making process would be looped. So, and the last type of problem that I see here is selective objections and the possibility, the risk of endless blocking of the initiative. And maybe in this case could be helpful that objections that look selective, for example, made by one party but not considered in the case of initiative of another party, so that these objections are being reviewed by majority of parties, for example, before they are binding. And to prevent the endless blocking, which is quite risky right now, especially if we remember the last precedent with Ross Sea protected area. So maybe we could use the override mechanism. For example, when CEP recommended adoption despite objections. So could be something like that. I can see that the time is coming out. So I hope that these ideas could be interesting for those who are also concerned about this issue, because the system itself is an amazing example of how many countries can work in some area. However, we can see that it can be, let's say, endangered and in risk because of lack of some mechanisms. So thank you so much for your attention, and please feel free to email me in case you are also interested in this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. We will now open the floor for questions.
Hello to everyone. Is there any questions for the presenters by Javi or Hannah? Hannah, please.
I have a question to the previous presenter. She mentioned developing the plastic monitoring framework as a possible measure. So I wonder, do you have some ideas or maybe suggestions what it could be? Because as you could see from my presentation, I'm also interested in frameworks, let's say, in my area.
Yeah, for now, I was looking at what the Arctic does. And I was wondering if we could do something similar where we can have some sort of, I guess, just trying to get enough data so we can have a framework that tells us certain policies need to be implemented. So for example, if we have the technology for capturing microplastics from laundry, then maybe that needs to be mandated on every single research station. So that's like my starting point. I haven't developed it completely just yet, but that was where I was getting to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, good luck with that.
Thank you.
So if there is no any question, we will wait a few minutes till 16:30 to start with Kasuni, a few minutes. Thank you very much, Hannah and by Javi for your presentations.
Okay, we continue with Kasuni Koswatage on what deserves priority in a changing climate, visiting Antarctica or experiencing it from afar. Welcome, Kasuni.
Hello, everyone. Hope you all can hear me. I'm Kasuni Koswatage, a second-year PhD candidate at University of Canterbury. The topic of my presentation is what deserves priority in a changing climate, visiting Antarctica or experiencing it from afar. So this presentation is basically about one of my research objectives and its preliminary findings. I will start by briefly describing the background, objectives, methods of my research, and then move on to the results and conclusions. Tourism has become one of the most prominent human activities in Antarctica. As you can see in this figure, visitor numbers have increased in recent years. Apart from that, tourist activities also have become more diverse. This trend reflects the world's increasing interest in Antarctica, but it also raises serious concerns about the environmental footprint of this travel. At the same time, it makes us ask an important question. Is tourism in this unique region truly sustainable? So that's why it is important to explore alternative ways to experience Antarctica from afar, because this area still remains as an under-researched area, and my study focuses on exploring these alternative forms of Antarctic tourism and how they might offer a more sustainable path for the future. When it comes to remote Antarctic tourism, gateway cities can play a bigger role in providing such opportunities. Here, I have included a few examples of how Christchurch offers such opportunities. Out of these 6 photos, 4 of them were taken in International Antarctic Center, which stimulates the Antarctic environment for its visitors. The next photo in the bottom, it was taken from the Lyttelton Port. an important hub where people can watch research vessels and cruise ships depart for Antarctica. And the last, finally, the cathedral window highlights the history of Christchurch, which also has a part for the early Antarctic connections between Christchurch and Antarctica. So as you can see, these remote experiences, Antarctic experiences, not only provide educational value, but also it helps people feel connected to the southern continent, especially for those who can't or those who don't want to visit in person. So in this presentation, I will discuss one of my research objectives, which is exploring Antarctic tourism potential in Christchurch as a gateway city, considering both travel to direct travel to Antarctica and Antarctic remote experience in Christchurch. For my research, I used several data collection methods. For this objective, the main method was an expert elicitation workshop. So in October 2024, we brought together 29 stakeholders from tourism, government, logistics, research, and business for this workshop. And these participants were pre-assigned into 5 different breakout groups. And on the day, they were provided with flip charts, pens, and supplementary or supporting materials to ensure active participation. They were asked structured questions on Antarctic travel, Antarctic connections, and Antarctic theme tourism opportunities in Christchurch. And the data collection was mainly conducted through collecting written flip chart data and the table audio recordings. For analysis, I use thematic analysis approach. This involved creating transcripts, coding key ideas, and grouping related codes into themes to identify related patterns in the data. So here, I will present the preliminary findings. So the analysis helped me to identify main categories of Antarctic tourism in Christchurch, mainly fall into 2. The first is the tourism involving physical travel to Antarctica. I will refer them as the in-situ tourism. And the second is remote Antarctic tourism in Christchurch, which I will refer as ex-situ tourism. So the stakeholders highlighted 2 types of in-situ tourism. First one is commercial Antarctic travel. For example, here you can see the only Christchurch-based tour operators cruise ship in southern continent. And the second type involves scientists and support personnel. So they support personnel who transiting through Christchurch. So they can be considered tourists in 2 ways, as tourists to Christchurch, because they spend time in the city either before they're departing for Antarctica or after returning, and also they can be tourists to Antarctica itself. About ex-situ tourism, stakeholders identified 3 main potential ways to experience Antarctica from Christchurch. So through attractions like International Antarctic Center and the events like Days of Ice, and also engaging with Christchurch Antarctic connections, for example, like audio trip. So I will go into more detail about ex-situ tourism on the next slide. So, as I mentioned earlier, Christchurch offers a variety of ex-situ tourism opportunities, which can be grouped mainly into 3: attractions, experiences, and events. About attractions, there are 3 such kinds. So first one is the Antarctic theme attractions, with the International Antarctic Center being the main example, specializing entirely in Antarctica. So the second one is local ventures showcasing Antarctic exhibits. They also have such as Canterbury Museum and Air Force Museum of New Zealand. They also have Antarctic exhibits to different levels. The third category is the Antarctic memorials like Scott Statue and Shackleton Oak. These Antarctic memorials also play an important role in Antarctic theme tourism in Christchurch. The other category is the Antarctic theme experiences. So stakeholders, our workshop participants highlighted three such experiences. They are like Antarctic City Walk, Lyttelton Walk, and the other one is the audio trail. So about the Antarctic theme events, they identified only one such event, which is Days of Ice. And here I have compared in situ and ex situ tourism using workshop data. Basically considering in situ and ex situ data. So in situ, with regards to in situ tourism, it gives a strong personal experience and also citizen science opportunities for tourists or visitors to Antarctica, but it has limited accessibility and has a higher environmental impact. On the other hand, ex-situ tourism has a lower environmental impact and widely accessible for visitors, and still it can raise awareness about Antarctic matters and the importance of Antarctica. And also our stakeholders mentioned about potential challenges and opportunities of Antarctic tourism. So about ex-situ tourism, the major challenges they have identified are the limited Antarctic ties to casual or first-time visitors and the competition from other gateway cities. And the educational potential and strong media access and journalistic capacity were identified as the opportunities of ex-situ tourism. When it comes to in-situ tourism, over-tourism was frequently mentioned as the potential challenging future, and bridging science and tourism in cruise ships was identified as a potential opportunity in in-situ tourism. So, to conclude, Antarctic tourism is growing, but in-situ tourism comes with high environmental cost and limited accessibility. When comparing to ex-situ tourism, it offers a low environmental impact and widely accessible for people. So, given in climate change scenario, ex-situ tourism should be prioritized as a sustainable approach, while in-situ tourism needs to be carefully managed. So, about the future research directions, I'm going to conduct a comprehensive SWOT analysis to identify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of Antarctic tourism in Christchurch. So, these are some of the references which I used to prepare my presentation. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Kasuni. Now, we would like to introduce Gabriela Roldan to present Antarctic tourism and the environmental impact assessment as a tool for tourism management. Welcome, Gabriela.
Gabriela, I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Your microphone is off there.
How about now?
We can hear you well, and we can see your presentation very well. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Okay. So I believe you can see the slides now, and so I will start. This is an initial, if you will, research project that I am undertaking. I am Gabriela Roldan. I am originally from Argentina, Ushuaia. So, hola,
I'm sorry, Gabriela. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we are not seeing the slides in full screen.
Okay. Sure.
I don't know
Thank you. Let's see.
if you could put it in full presentation.
Sure.
We're so sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. No problem. How is that? Is that better now?
Yes, there it is. Yes, thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you for letting me know. So my name is Gabriela Rolda. I'm originally from Argentina. So buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, wherever you are. And I am based in Christchurch, New Zealand. And this is an initial research project that I would like to introduce here with an interest to gathering not only some more information, potential collaborations, and so on. There is a body of work with regard to environmental impact assessments, and there's many people in the audience that are much more experts in the area. I'm looking at you, Luis Valentin, and I'm looking at many of the other colleagues, and of course, the University of Law, Derecho de la Universidad de Chile. However, what I have been working on lately is with one of the Dutch consortia called GuideBest. GuideBest is a growing understanding of individual drivers of expectation behaviors to enhance sustainable tourism in Antarctica. My work there is to look at the workforce, actually the guides that enhance that Antarctic experience for visitors. So for those of you that, let's see if I can advance. For those of you with that are not familiar with the management of Antarctic tourism, quite simplistic here. I'm just bringing it up. It's a very complex system because it's made up with national competent authority that you require to submit an approval for your operations in the Antarctic, then the Antarctic Treaty System measures, which are agreements and not totally legally binding. Then the industry through the lobby group IATO, which at the moment involves the majority of tour operators, but not all, they have agreed on some measures, and they make these mandatory to their members. And we have to remember this is to their members. And so the members adopt these when and if possible. Now, there are operators that are non-IATO members in this industry self-managed agreement poses obviously a lot of questions there. And indirectly, Antarctic tourism, just like any shipping in the polar regions, is managed by the Polar Code that is introduced by the International Maritime Organization. So we've got a really complex system here. Now, I have to say the industry through IATO, the International Association for Antarctica Tour Operators, have done a magnificent job in managing Antarctic tourism in the sense of making it somewhat easier, if you will, to see that the activity is managed in the Antarctic. Now, for a tour operator to operate in the Antarctic, you have to abide by the Madrid Protocol or the Protocol for Environmental Protection of the Antarctic. Within the tools of the protocol, the environmental impact assessment is the main tool that regulates human activities in the Antarctic. Now, for tourism, many other colleagues, particularly experts in international relations, international law, Antarctic Treaty System, and so on, have already spoken about that the environmental impact assessment is not really a tool for tourism or to manage tourism, particularly because in 1991, when these measures were agreed, tourism was not a big activity, and therefore everything was thought to be a science party or support party for science. And therefore, the tool for management is actually quite it's a little bit of a conundrum here. It's trying to fit a pig in a square hole. So I have to say that the Environmental Impact Assessment database on the Antarctic Treaty Secretariat website is fantastic. It has 86 pages of these documents that have been uploaded. So it's a fantastic resource. However, not every nation submits the tour operator application. We can only see some applications. Some countries don't submit the application itself, just submit that has been approved. We also cannot see what sort of considerations or discussions have been made throughout the process of the application as well. And it is difficult to access National Competent Authority files. So this is a limitation of the research project that I'm embarking on. Sadly, there's no repository for post-visit reports or all the National Authority Environmental Impact Assessment, and in the case of tourism, the initial environmental evaluation, which is what it's the first step and is the tool that indicates that the human activity to be undertaken in Antarctica is going to be of a less than a minor or transitory impact. What does that mean? It means that it won't cause a big and noticeable impact in the Antarctic environment. Well, as we know, with the decades of Antarctic tourism operating in the Antarctic end, the numbers of not only visitors, ships, but also operations and diversification of the activities, we are probably past the understanding that tourism is only producing a less than a minor or transitory impact. However, this is the rule so far as it stands. So I'm a tour operator and I submit an initial environmental evaluation to my competent authority, to my country, which is an Antarctic Treaty signatory party. So one of the problems with the IEE is that there's no standard to what they are going to require. You have to prove that your activity is going to be causing less than a minor or transitory impact. So in the many documents that are in these 86 pages in the database, you can see all different types of information, and not all of them, as I said, are standards. The decision from the National Competent Authority is to proceed or not proceed. And as I said, we don't know what happens in between these two decisions. The majority of the IEEs have been approved to proceed. The IEEs are often prepared by a third party, someone who is renting their Antarctic expertise in order to prepare these environmental evaluation impacts, and therefore it is somewhat removed from the actual tour operator's company. They are hired to do this paperwork, if you will. From the beginning of the 2000s, many tour operators and national competent authorities were allowing their tour operators to actually include multiple seasons. So up to 5 years of operations are approved under the one initial environmental assessment. And therefore, this poses questions with, as we said before, the growth and the very fast diversification of activities. What you proposed 5 or 6 years ago, it's probably not happening today. And also, companies can include in the same document multiple ships that they operate in the area. So with the possibility of operating up to 4 or 5 ships in the area. Again, this paperwork seems very much bureaucratic rather than looking at the environmental impact that these operations could potentially have in the Antarctic. So this is what a typical, I'm not naming the tour operator here. This is what a typical IEE application looks like, and they're talking very broadly about where they're going to operate, but they do an emphasis that they will be operating in sites that have been listed in this comprehensive list that has been put together by IATO, and in this case, National Science Foundation, which is part of the National Competent Authority agencies. And there are pages and pages and pages of these places. So in a way, it means that they can operate, if you will, within the boundaries of these sites that have been listed. So when in the last few years, we see information like this, that new penguin colony was discovered near the Antarctic Peninsula by a tour operator. You mean, hold on, your permit mentioned that you could operate within the boundaries of this comprehensive list of sites, bays, and places. And now we're talking about discovering new places. So you've ventured outside what was expected within the IEE and discover something that is great for science, great for general knowledge. However, does this is this relating to your permit or not? So going back to my question for how to approach this research, I want to know how this document actually translates into the field, to the actors on the field. And these are the bridge officers, the expedition team, and also,
Gabriela,
of
you
course, the
have
guys. Yes.
1 minute to finish your presentation.
Okay, sorry, I'm going too far there. So these are the tools that they have included here, and of course, experience and the scheduler that IATA puts together are the main tools. However, there is no mention of the IEE. I took a screenshot to the ships that were on the 14th of January of 2024, did not include the ones that were in the Falkland Islands or at port. And this is what happened in January. 38 expedition ships and 4 large cruise ships on the same day in December, same day in February, same day in March. As you can see, it's a lot of people, a lot of ships making decisions on where to go and not perhaps looking at what has been approved as the main document for environmental protection. Just a few notes on the cruise-only voyages. These are voyages that have a very complex system of decision making, are able to change or cancel their Antarctic days as well, because it is not the main reason for the voyages included in the South American voyages itineraries. But they're also very susceptible to changing weather and ice conditions because of their large size. Other things that expedition leaders have to consider with this is avian flu, or where other ships are, or how many people they have, and where do they can they offer what the expectation is. The environmental impact assessment is the tool to protect the Antarctic environment. Now, within the documentations we do have that monitoring can be a part of the tools for restricting or observing how the approval of these tools are applied on the field. So there are limitations to this research, as I said before. This is just an initial stage, and we'll more likely come back with more results in the near future. This is where to find me, and just a little plug to the SCAR Antarctic Tourism Research Group that I have the pleasure to co-lead. If you would like to join us or find out what we do, please take a picture of the website and come and join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. Questions?
Thank you very much, Gabriela and Kasuni. I would like to prevent all the presenters that when you hear a music, it's because your time has done, the 12 minutes for your presentation. Is there any question for Kasuni or Gabriela? We still have a few minutes if you want to ask something. No? Okay, so thank you very much. Oh, there's a question. A question for Kasuni. Do you think field research in Antarctica would also have a touristic aspect, even if it's not technically considered tourism?
Could you please repeat it? I didn't get it. I think I had a connection issue or something. Could you please repeat that question again? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Kasuni, but we can't see you. There.
Yeah, could you please repeat that question, please?
Yes, the question says, do you think field research in Antarctica could also have a touristic aspect, even if it's not technically considered tourism?
Yes. Yes, it also has an touristic part because as I shown in one of my slides, while they were not doing their work there, they can be considered as tourists because I know some people, they go to study about glaciology or some about ice things, but at the same time, when they are moving to their fields their locations, they also visit the scenery, and also at that moment they can be penguins or wildlife. So at that moment we can consider them as tourists. From the UN definitions also supports that thing. So at that moment we can consider them as the tourists to Antarctica as well.
Thank you very much, Kasuni.
Thank you.
Now we would like to welcome Maria Agustina Falco, who is going to present the use of soft power in the geopolitical dispute over Antarctica, a comparative study between Argentina, Chile, and the United Kingdom, 1961-2024. Welcome, Maria Agustina.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. I will share my screen. I have a presentation. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen, but not full screen.
There, right?
Yes, we're ready. Thank you.
Well, as it was stated, I would be presenting the use of soft power in the geopolitical dispute over Antarctica, compared to a study between Argentina, Chile, and the United Kingdom from 1961 to 2024. So overall, the study explores how these three countries, each with different capacities and positions in the international system, use soft power to shape influence and legitimacy over a continent where hard power is restricted. So I would love to start to recall a little bit what makes Antarctica truly unique. So since the Antarctic Treaty entered into force in 1961, the continent has been dedicated exclusively to peaceful and scientific purposes. Military activity, nuclear testing, and sovereignty claims are all suspending, turning Antarctica into natural reserves devoted to peace and science. It's the only continent where conflict is banned and cooperation is mostly mandatory. So here, power isn't built through armies or resources, but through diplomacy, science, and collaboration. And that's precisely why soft power becomes a central tool for states to protect legitimacy and to shape governance. But first, what do we mean by power? Traditionally, in international relations, power is the ability of one actor to affect the behavior of others to obtain the outcomes one wants, usually through coercion, military force, or economic pressure. But in Antarctica, this classical notion of power loses much of its meaning because the treaty explicitly bans any military activity. So, in such context, states cannot rely on force to protect influence. Instead, they must turn to other forms of power, particularly soft power, a concept that was developed by Joseph Nye in the 90s, which refers to the capacity to attract, persuade, and gain legitimacy through culture, values, and foreign policy rather than coercion. And this leads us to geopolitics, traditionally known as the study of power and territory. Yet, in Antarctica, geopolitics is redefined because influence is not about controlling land or borders, but about who can build legitimacy through science, diplomacy, and environmental cooperation. So in this sense, Antarctic geopolitics is not about domination, but about legitimacy, about who manages to define norms, build trust, and lead cooperation. So, if military and economic coercion are off the table, why does Antarctica still matter? What is the geopolitical relevance of Antarctica? Because it's far from an empty desert, a frozen desert. It's a strategic frontier rich in resources, science, and environmental significance. It regulates global climate systems, holds about 70% of world's fresh water, and it sits at the center of overlapping territorial claims. So beyond its scientific value, it has become a symbolic and political stage where nations project narratives and legitimacy. So given this context, my research asked how do countries compete or cooperate in practice? To answer that question, I followed a qualitative and comparative approach that examines three countries with overlapping territorial claims, as you can see in the map here, across six historical periods from 1961 to 2024, and analyzing 4 dimensions and 5 effectiveness norms. So the first analytical dimension, is international cooperation. So diplomacy and cooperation are central to how states build legitimacy in Antarctica. Historically, Argentina and Chile have promoted South collaboration, scientific partnerships, and proposals such as the Joint Marine Protected Area in the Antarctic Peninsula. However, these initiatives often face political constraints, as seen in the Russian and Chinese vetoes within the Kamala framework. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom, through strong alliances and leadership in multilateral forums, has managed to translate its diplomatic legitimacy into tangible results, such as the Madrid Protocol and the establishment of several MPAs. So this shows a crucial difference. While Argentina and Chile seek legitimacy through collaboration, the UK translates alliances and influence into regulatory leadership. So, another of the dimensions is presence in the region. So beyond diplomacy, this indicator of influence is this physical presence. So who actually operates, lives, and works in Antarctica? Argentina maintains the largest presence in the continent with 6 permanent and 7 temporary bases, reflecting continuity and sovereignty claims since 1904. Chile has fewer facilities, but consolidated Punta Arenas as a logistical and scientific hub, promoting an image of the Antarctic Bridge. The United Kingdom operates through the Antarctic British Survey and has fewer but far more technologically advanced facilities like Rothera, combining science, logistics, and innovation. So in essence, Argentina represents continuity, Chile symbolizes functionality, and the UK embodies technological sophistication and prestige. Another dimension is the maritime exploitation, because soft power is exercised through how countries regulate and legitimize the use of Antarctic resources. Argentina, Chile, and the United Kingdom share conservation goals, and they all participate in the CAMLR framework, but their strategies differ. Argentina relies on legality because it denounces illegal fishing and activities in disputed zones, but has limited resources, and its international traction often reduces its influence. Chile builds legitimacy through science and environmental responsibility, promoting sustainable fisheries and earning global certifications that reinforce its technical credibility. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom leads through regulatory power, shaping quotas, conservation norms, and creating large marine protected areas. But this leadership is also controversial because the UK has also acted unilaterally, authorizing fishing and conservation measures in disputed areas without CAMLR consensus, which undermines the very multilateral principles it promotes. So, soft power also works through culture, education, and tourism that shape how nations are perceived, and this is the last analytical dimension. Argentina and Chile integrate Antarctica into their education systems, national commemorations and museums, and also the part that they claim into their maps. Also, they use their cities that are the most close to the continent. For example, Ushuaia, that has become the world's main tourist getaway to the continent, strengthening Argentina's symbolic visibility, and Chile, through the INACH and the Antarctic Museum in Punta Arena, connects science with public outreach, reinforcing also the civic identity. The United Kingdom leverages cultural diplomacy through BBC documentaries, British Council programs, and educational materials like Discover Antarctica to sustain a global narrative of leadership and environmental responsibility. So in this way, museums, documentaries, and classrooms become new arenas of power, where influence is exercised not through force, but through narratives and education. So, how effective are these strategies? First, I would like to say that soft power, the impact of soft power is subtle and long-term because it operates through legitimacy, attraction, and credibility rather than coercion. So, across 5 criteria: institutional presence, international recognition, normative incidence, articulation, and symbolic visibility, there are several results. Argentina shows strong historical continuity and identity, but has limited modernization and weak diplomatic articulation. Chile represents a smaller but more integrated model combining science, logistics, and culture into a coherent national strategy. But Chile's influence remains mainly regional. And the UK leads in scientific credibility, institutional leadership, and diplomatic influence, turning knowledge into governance. From the Madrid Protocol to marine protected areas, it exemplifies how normative power in action. So, as you can see on the screen, proximity does not equal power. What defines leadership here is the ability to transform knowledge into influence and legitimacy into governance. So I would love to, well, this leads also to an open question that can the southern countries articulate a joint strategy to balance symbolic inequality, or will soft power remain concentrated in global powers? And my research confirmed the central hypothesis was that all three actors use soft power as a key instrument in Antarctica, but its effectiveness depends on each one's institutional capacity, resources, and international projection. So, and also looking ahead with challenges such as climate change, unregulated fishing, and weakening multilateralism, they threaten the stability of the Antarctic regime. So the final question I'd love to leave open is that if soft power alone will be sufficient to preserve Antarctic governance in the face of mounting global pressures, where
You can finish your presentation, Maria Agustina. You just have 1 minute left.
No, it's okay. I finished. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Maria Agustina. Now we continue with Gustavo Ramirez and the presentation Fields of Competence, Navigating the Areas Where ATCM Has Become Active. Welcome, Gustavo.
Thank you, Diego. Can you confirm that you can hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you, Gustavo.
Thank you. And I'm now sharing my screen. Is that all right as well?
Yes, we can see it well as well. Thank you very
Excellent. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I would like to thank, in the first place, the organizers of this excellent venue. I know how much work goes into this, so thank you very much for your efforts. I'm going to let you into one bit of my doctoral research. This presentation is nestled into my research project. The general title is International Law and EU Law Perspectives for Further Involvement of the European Union in Antarctic Governance. So as you can see, I'm combining different areas of the law. And when I have told people about my doctoral research, the question that I very often get in return is, why should the EU care about Antarctica at all? And that is why I have titled the chapter where this bit of my research is nestled, The Reasons for the EU to Care about Antarctica. And my reply is quite simply, well, because it's competent. The EU has competencies, or at least I'm trying to determine that the EU has relevant competencies in fields relevant to Antarctica. For those of you who are not familiar with EU law, the European Union has broadly three categories of competences. You could go a bit deeper into them, but mainly there are exclusive EU competences, competences that are shared between the EU and its member states, and supporting competences. And what I've done here, what I'm going to present to you, is the first step towards ascertaining whether or not there are overlaps between the EU competences and Antarctica, which is to determine the competences of the Antarctic Fora as a basis for a comparison with EU competences. In this presentation, I'm going to focus especially on the ATCM rather than the other fora. For this, I have taken the approach that the ICJ took in 1986 in its advisory opinion on nuclear weapons, where it stated that in order to delineate the field of activity or the area of competence of an international organization, or in this case, an international institution, one must refer to the relevant rules of the organization and, in the first place, to its constitution. And here I included the expression of institutions, international institutions, because as Ulfstein says, the forms of international or institutional cooperation different to international organizations does not necessarily mean that they have any less decision-making power. So we can look at other forms of institutional cooperation and still find decision-making powers, which means that they would also have certain kind of competences. So how did I go about this? Again, using the criterion of the ICJ, I used the well-established rules of treaty interpretation, that is what have been agreed upon in the Vienna Convention of the Law of the Treaties, particularly grammatical interpretation and also the subsequent practice of parties, without forgetting, of course, what Blocher warns us, that in the sense that the Vienna Convention is talking about the practice of the states, of the parties, rather than the institution. And what I have analyzed is the primary sources, that is the Antarctic Treaty, and to some extent also the Madrid Protocol, and also and especially secondary sources, that is the agreed agenda, as reported in the final reports of every ATCM since 1961, and the recommendations, because as Colson says, although they don't directly deal with matters mentioned in the treaty, they have not been challenged as being beyond the power under the treaty. So the fact that they have been discussed, these matters, that they haven't been challenged as not being competent. And I used a tool for qualitative research, which is ATLAS-T. So many of you will probably know the areas mentioned in Article 9 of the Antarctic Treaty, the use for peaceful purposes, the facilitation of scientific research and cooperation, exercise of Article 7 rights, the question of jurisdiction, and very importantly, the preservation of conservation of living resources. And this latter point is of the utmost importance because, as Alfred van der Essen says, it was this field that allowed an oblique way, as he calls it, for economic activities to find their way into the ATCMs. That is, out of the concern of the possible detrimental effects on the Antarctic environment and the conservation of living resources. But here we can already find two stages. You could find the first stage up until the 1972 ATCM, which would be dealing with the effects of the activities of human activities on the environment. And since the 1975 ATCM, directly dealing with the exploitation of Antarctic resources. And that would begin, of course, with mineral resources and so on. So already 40 years ago, Bush and Orrego Vicuña listed a series of fields that were not mentioned in the treaty, but still had been dealt with in the ATCMs, that is, assist. You can read them here. I'm just going to save some time and go to the next slide to discuss, well, what has happened since, what has happened in the last 40 years. Here, as I mentioned, I had a review. I reviewed the agenda items and the recommendations. By that I mean both recommendations and also the measures, decisions, and resolutions according to the nomenclature of since 1995. And thereafter, I have grouped them in several specific fields. So the first would be economic activities, and that would include tourism and mining, the use of Antarctic ice, and bioprospecting, which is now becoming very important. Environment, and there you can make reference to in many regards to what Hannah and Gabriela have presented before, but also in terms of ASPAS and environmental assessment, but also species protection and marine pollution and the regime on liability, internal matters and procedures, all sorts of scientific matters, including, for example, nuclear energy and oceanography, meteorite protection, operational matters and information exchange. The operational matters would also point to the fact that this is an institution, albeit different to an international organization, telecommunications, relations with other organizations, transport, inspections and compliance, infrastructure, education and training, cultural projects, and cultural aesthetic values. So this goes to confirm what Coulson already said over 40 years ago, that the real issue when it comes to competences or fields of action in the ATCM is not whether the treaty covers a particular topical issue, but whether the parties can reach an agreement on that issue. So this is very pliable, very flexible. If the parties agree that a matter can be discussed, then it's a field of action. Here I have included also several fields of action that are explicitly mentioned in the Madrid Protocol. So the protocol includes both fields of action and that have been entrusted to the Committee for Environmental Protection. But we must remember that in the end, it is the ATCM that is the decision-making forum under the Madrid Protocol. So everything that I have listed here that is explicitly mentioned in the protocol is also to be included under the fields of action, or if you will, the competencies of the ATCM. And there are some that are yet to be actively included as the Annex 6 eventually comes into force. Nevertheless, there are some areas that ought to be considered as excluded due to special regimes or lex specialis, which is pelagic sealing, because this is specifically treated under the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Seals, and the conservation and rational use of, and fishing, of course, of marine living resources, because that's under the special regime of CAMLA. Nevertheless, there is an area to be considered an overlap between CAMLA and the Antarctic Treaty, that is ATCM, which is area protection, so ASPAS and ASMAS, that include a marine area. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Gustavo. We will now open the floor for questions.
Okay, if there is not any question, thank you very much, Gustavo and Maria Agustina, for your presentations. We will wait a few minutes till 17:30 to start with Indu. Thank you very much to everyone.
Okay, we continue with Indu Vinayagam presenting Tourists at the Edge, Environmental Histories and the Shift Governance of Antarctica's Human Footprint. Welcome, Indu.
I'll just share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, we can see your
Got it. Okay, so hello everyone. It's an honor to be presenting today. I'm currently in India and it's about 2 a.m. here. So if I'm a bit slow, please bear with me. I'll just begin with a quick introduction. My name is Indu Vinayagam and I recently completed my master's in global environment studies at Sophia University in Tokyo, where I focused on the environmental history of the Antarctic Treaty System. Broadly, I'm interested in polar governance and cultural geography, and I'm currently an aspiring PhD candidate in Antarctic governance. And today's talk kind of outlines my potential PhD research, so it's still in the upcoming stages. It draws on environmental history to examine how humanity has imagined, accessed, and governed fragile frontiers global commons from Antarctica to outer space through the lens of tourism. So I'll start with some context, and from the previous presentations as well, we all know that Antarctic tourism has grown dramatically over the past few decades. And from 1993 to 1994, there were fewer than 8,000 tourists who visited the continent, but by 22-23, that number has exceeded over 104K. Projections for this season are around 120K, and by 33 to 34, this could rise to over 450,000. So this growth is driven by rising global wealth, expanded cruise infrastructure, and a governance structure that remains relatively permissive. So historically, it can be said that Antarctica shifted from being just a scientific preserve to a booming tourism destination. The heroic era of exploration gave way to scientific activity under the treaty, but by the 60s, tourism had quietly begun, and by 90s, it had grown into a full-scale industry. So what's particularly interesting is the role of imaginaries is something that I aim to research. It is marketed as a pristine wilderness, which attracts visitors, but this image can conflict with its scientific and conservation-focused identity. Next up is just a brief introduction to the evolution of Antarctic tourism. Tourism isn't new. As early as the 1920s, there were visitors, but the main shift came in 58, where the first vessels carried paying passengers to the South Shetland Islands. And in 66, the first dedicated cruise. This kind of marked the start of organized commercial tourism. And by 91, the number of tourists had already surpassed the number of scientists and support personnel. And by 2000s, we saw rapid increases in visitor numbers, along with a wider range of activities from kayaking to mountaineering. On the governance side, we have the areas that lay the legal framework, and IATO in 91 helped formalize industry self-regulation. However, as tourism expands in scale, scope, and complexity, these frameworks have been increasingly under pressure. So I have kind of categorized 4 major challenges that I kind of want to address. First is that the governance is fragmented. As we all know, there's no single treaty for tourism, and instead we have a mix of protocols, consultative decisions, voluntary industry guidelines, and these are definitely not legally binding. This leads to inconsistent enforcement, especially between countries. And second is that tourism is rapidly growing and diversifying. It's not just cruises anymore. We're now seeing land-based expeditions, flying visits, and more extreme adventure tourism. This kind of brings me to the third environmental risk, which is disturbance to wildlife, erosion at frequently visited sites, pollution. We just had a presentation about plastic pollution, potential for invasive species, and climate change is amplifying these risks by opening new areas and lengthening the season. Finally is the governance system. So in institutional inertia and historical inertia. So decision-making itself, slow consensus-based, and self-regulation helps, but doesn't ensure full compliance, especially with newer or non-member operators. And all this kind of raises the question, can the current system keep up with the pace and pressure of expanding tourism? This is a very integral part of my PhD proposal, which is cultural geography. So I'll shift and just basically kind of give a brief idea. This approach looks at how humans engage with landscapes, not just physically, but symbolically. And Antarctica tourism involves more than just visiting a remote place. It involves imagining that place, often through powerful narratives of wilderness, exploration, and purity. And a key dynamic here is commodification. Cruises and curated experience can make Antarctica feel like a consumable product where visitors are shielded from its realities, but at the same time, tourism increasingly blends natural sites with historical elements, such as explorer huts or scientific stations, and this kind of creates hybrid heritage sites where nature and culture can intersect. But tourists often encounter these sites without much contextual interpretation, which can limit their engagement with the climate and geopolitical issues that's one of the main concerns. And this whole conference, the main topics have been climate and geopolitical issues. So tourists may often limit their engagement with issues like this. And lastly, there's the idea of Antarctification. So the way tourism marketing constructs dominant stories about the continent, such as a place of heroic exploration, a romantic, empty wilderness, a land of superlatives, cold, remote, extreme, these kind of adjectives, and basically a place of environmental responsibility, which has been a very common and very hot topic these days. And these narratives strongly influence both tourist behavior and also perceptions of the public. So for my upcoming, this is all upcoming in the work. My research hopes to compare Antarctica, Arctic, and outer space as fragile frontiers or global commons, or just like areas beyond national borders where tourism, governance, cultural geography, and imaginaries converge, drawing on environmental history to examine how humanity, as humans, throughout history have imagined, accessed, and governed these spaces through the lens of tourism. So Antarctica, as I just said before, it's seen as the last wilderness. Arctic is inhabited and shaped by indigenous agency, while outer space represents the newest frontier. Antarctica, while tourism brings economic interest, it also reinforces environmental consciousness and symbolic soft power for treaty nations in Antarctica. For Arctic, tourism closely related to local communities, traditional knowledge, and impacts of climate change. The governance over here kind of blends state sovereignty with multilateral cooperation. However, outer space is, the regulation is weak, especially concerning environmental risks such as space debris or emissions. And unlike Antarctica or the Arctic, space tourism is dominated by corporate interests, and access is limited to the ultra wealthy. So this is just kind of a comparison that I made. Antarctica follows treaty-based cooperative model. Arctic reflects a hybrid model, combining sovereignty with English-led governance. Outer space is currently driven by corporate ambition with currently very minimal environmental oversight. And the imaginaries that are tied to each space are also differ. And now space is the final frontier, Antarctica as the last wilderness, and Arctic as the endangered homeland. So these imaginaries shape not only tourism, but also policy priorities, conservation efforts, and geopolitical narratives. And ultimately, they reveal deeper tensions between cooperation and competition, access and preservation, and the future of governing not only global commons, as Arctic cannot be considered a global common, but places that are beyond national borders. So as for the conclusion, Antarctic tourism is not just an environmental or regulatory issue. It's deeply cultural and shaped by narratives of wilderness, purity, and geopolitical branding. That's why I believe that social science plays a very important role. And while governance frameworks like the ATS offer a stable foundation, they're increasingly strained by the rapid tourism growth and fragmented enforcement. So through comparative analysis, I hope to find any links and lessons that can be applied vice versa among various fragile frontiers, global commons, and places that are beyond national jurisdictions, such as how Arctic models emphasize inclusion and resilience, while space tourism highlights the risk of commercialization without governance. a key lesson is that common governance must move beyond legal mechanisms, and it must account to social sciences, for historical narratives, cultural placemaking, and adaptive strategies to remain effective in the face of climate change and geopolitical shifts. These are my references, and thank you so much for your attention. It was an honor to present today, and a huge thanks to the Faculty of Law at University of Chile for hosting this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Indu. Now we would like to introduce Robert Summerson to present Implementing the Protection of Intrinsic Value in Antarctica, a case study. Welcome, Robert.
Good morning. Firstly, I'd just like to check that you can hear me okay.
Yes, Rupert, we can hear you okay.
Okay, cool. Just let me get this started. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to present at this conference. It's 20 to 8 in the morning here in Australia, you're tomorrow. This is a product of the SCAR Humanities and Social Sciences Action Group on Intrinsic Value in Antarctica, AGIVA, and this is a case study on wilderness aesthetic and intrinsic values. So we're interested in the protection of the intrinsic value. As most of you will be familiar, this is the Article 3 from the Madrid Protocol, environmental principles, where it says that the protection of the Antarctic environment and the intrinsic value of Antarctica, including its wilderness and aesthetic values, shall be fundamental considerations in the planning and conduct of all activities in the Antarctic Treaty Area. So there are no agreed definition of these values under the protocol, nor any agreement on how these values should be protected. There is, however, a substantial body of literature on values, but in the 12 minutes I have, I don't have time to go into all of them, in fact, hardly any of them. So in this presentation, a number of assumptions will be made, and some of these will be controversial. Hopefully we'll get a debate. So some preliminary thoughts. Intrinsic value is the value something has in itself, not as a benefit. So that's kind of an opening statement. There are a number of definitions of intrinsic value and kind of variants, but let's just take that as the starting point. So I believe that wilderness and aesthetic values can be considered as components of or indicators of intrinsic value. Now that's controversial, okay? Wilderness carries a lot of cultural baggage, but it's the word used in the Madrid Protocol. So therefore we have defined it as the antithesis of human presence and therefore non-instrumental. Aesthetic value is a disinterested value. Immanuel Kant back in 1790 defined aesthetic value as disinterested, and therefore if it's a disinterested value, it cannot be instrumental. A few other quick points. Obviously, values are the things we value. You know, we talk about values quite a lot, but we need to be clear that they are quite simply the things that we value. And to value something is more than merely liking it. I believe that in order to value something, there has to be a valuer. That's controversial. Valuing may provide justification and an ethical basis for protection. So having defined or assigned value to something, then it seems kind of logical to that you may want to protect it. And I also believe that how we value something is measurable, and I will demonstrate that shortly. So we've taken the Vestfold Hills as our case study area. In the map on the left, the map of Antarctica, you can see roughly where it is. It's over in Eastern Antarctica. It's an area of about 500 square kilometers of So low, rocky hills, and actually quite sort of biblically desert-like. So here's just some photos to give you an idea of what it's like. So top left, here's a fjord, one of the deep indentations from the sea. Top right is a lake, and the two pictures at the bottom are fairly typical inland landscape. So dry, rocky, quite wildernessy looking. Davis Station in the bottom left was established nearly 70 years ago. This is the second generation station, and there's been a lot of human activity associated with it, as you can see in these other photos. There's a field hut, someone has drilled some holes in the rock, bulldozed the track, marked a survey mark with paint, etc. Back when I was doing my PhD, more than 10 years ago, I did an internet survey on wilderness and aesthetic values in Antarctica. So this generated a lot of data, which I've come back to revisit for this project. So the survey comprised 3 sets of 30 images, and 90 images in all, 16 pairs of manipulated images, 6 landscape types, and there are 3 components. There's a photo of a landscape, and the respondents are asked whether they think the scene represents wilderness on a yes or no. Give an aesthetic value rating on a 7-point scale, and also select the suitability of a number of adjectives. Because I believe that when you're looking at a landscape, you don't think, oh, it's a 6 or a 7. You think, oh, it's beautiful or it's wonderful. So I'll come back to the adjectives in a minute. So these are the 12 images. There are 12 images of the Vestfold Hills in my survey, as you can see there, and we'll look at the responses to 4 of them in detail in a minute. So these are the adjectives. So they're divided into 2 groups: words associated with the beautiful and the sublime. So you can see that it's kind of typical adjectives. At the bottom of the beautiful list, you can see a couple of non-beautiful adjectives: ugly and unpleasant. They're the opposite of beautiful. Sublime, austere, barren, bleak, desolate, all those other wonderful adjectives. So let's have a look around at the images and the responses. So there are 134 responses to this image. It's fairly typical sort of interior landscape of the Vestfolds. 130 people rated it as wilderness and 4 as not wilderness. And somebody told me that they would never rate a photo as wilderness because they didn't know what was behind them, even though I assured people that the landscape in the image represented the landscape all around. Aesthetic rating, 4.9 out of 7, with a standard deviation of 1.55, so pretty tight. And here in the bottom right in the radar graph is the response to the adjectives. So you can see that vast, austere, barren, a little bit of breathtaking, desolate, impressive, magnificent, not quite so much spectacular, but these are the types of adjectives people think are suitable to for this landscape. Here's another photo. This one shows quite a distinct vehicle track. 114 responses to this one. As you can see, wilderness assessment of wilderness and what not wilderness are split exactly 50-50. The aesthetic rating is 3.25, and actually even tighter standard deviation. So the adjectives that are suitable here. Barren comes across very strongly, desolate, and we've got a bit of ugly and unpleasant creeping in there too, no doubt in response to the road, or the track rather, track road. Example number 3, this is the view that you would see of Davis Station when you arrive. So 155 responses to this. Interestingly, 22 people considered this was wilderness, and 132 not wilderness, so they're definitely in the majority. You can see that the adjective rating suitability is that ugly comes across very strongly, followed by unpleasant, and a little bit of desolate, bleak, austere, and barren. Okay, let's move along to number 4. This is a scene of Marine Plain, and thanks to Ewan McIver for the use of this photo. Marine Plain is in the sort of southwest of the Vestfolds. So 112 responses to this, 107 considered this wilderness, possibly the same 4 people who thought that this was not wilderness for reasons as described. And so you can see that a number of the adjectives come through strongly. You can see that pretty much none of the beautiful, the lexicon of the beautiful come through in this. It's almost the epitome of barren, bleak and desolate, like dusting of snow on the dark surface. Aesthetic rating is actually reasonably high though. But of course, you had to remember that aesthetic rating is not just beautiful, it is also the sublime. All right, so what can we conclude from this study? Well, firstly, that wilderness and aesthetic values can be considered as components and indicators of intrinsic value. So we can see that in those 4 examples, that high wilderness and aesthetic value scores are indicators of intrinsic value. There's no instrumental value component there. Responses to these values can be elicited by surveys, and I had quite powerful statistics from those numbers of the responses. In the Vestfold Hills, there are a number of common elements. For example, no or minimal human impact is more highly valued. And okay, I only showed you 4 images, but if you looked at all 12, that comes through very strongly. Common aesthetic responses, for example, desolate reflects wilderness. And so therefore responses reflect the intrinsic value of the landscape. So at this stage, food for thought and more discussion. I'm not saying that this is the end of the study, but this is, we think, a useful contribution to it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you to the organisers for this, and I guess we'll be having questions shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rupert. We will now open the floor for questions.
Okay, so there is one question for Rupert from Kevin Hughes, who says, how do you think we can get more discussion with the CEP and ATCM on wilderness values?
Sorry, I missed the first part of that question, but was it how can we?
How do you think we can get more discussion with the CEP and ATCM on wilderness values?
Okay, well, I think that certainly one thing on our agenda is to produce an information paper for the CEP and possibly also the ATCM. I think we'll start off with the CEP. That describes the conclusions that we've come to about how we can approach this and put forward some practical measures. I think that what the treaty system needs is practical measures that people can implement. So I think that a survey like this, which is relatively easy to implement, get a large number of responses, I think that will give treaty parties some confidence that this is these values are widely accepted.
Thank you very much, Rupert. We still have a few more minutes for any question. Is there another question for Rupert or Indu? No? Well, thank you very much to both of you for your excellent presentations. We will wait a few minutes till 18 to the next block of this session. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Now, with Linda Walsworthy and her presentation about Towards Transparency and Accessibility in Southern Ocean Governance, Assessing the Applicability of ATCM 47, Working Paper 16 to CAMLR. Welcome, Linda.
Hi, sorry, I had a slight problem there with connection, but I will now share my screen. Just need to get it into presentation mode. Sorry. There we go. Okay. Hi, and thank you very much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, Linda, we can hear you all
Okay.
right, and we see your presentation as well.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. I'd like to start with acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I am meeting, and you too. For me, this is the land of the Wabunja clan of the Yuin people on the New South Wales south coast of Australia. And for Katie, my co-writer, it's the Muwa-ni-na land of Nipaluna Hobart. And we pay our respects to elders past and present, and to all traditional owners that are participating today. Today's presentation is part of a work that is in progress, exploring transparency, engagement and accessibility in CAMLR through the perspectives of both those who attend meetings and well as sorry, I've just managed to go forward. I need to get back. I don't know what's happened. Apologies. I'll just keep, here we go. That's better. Sorry. This is some work that is a collaboration between thinking about those that are actually inside a meeting, but also those that can't be inside the meeting. And it's a collaboration between Katie, who's an early career researcher who is engaged in that broader perspective of transparency and public engagement, and myself, who is a recent convert to the academia, but also an international meeting tragic, and have been around in international meetings, including CAMLR, for more than 35 years. So today, because this work is still in progress, we thought we would just share some of our work against the recent proposals for increased transparency that have been discussed in the ATCM. So, why transparency? In a world that is facing an existential environmental crisis and increasing geopolitical conflict, observation and critique of the efforts of international regimes by civil society, academic institutions, and the private sector is growing significantly. And this is reflected in the recent trend towards transparency within international regimes, particularly environmental governance regimes. Many these days reference the importance of public access to information, as well as the right of the public to participate in environmental decision making. So we start with the premise that, of course, states clearly have primary responsibility under international law and often have valid reasons for protecting certain information, particularly that related to national security or commercial interests, but nevertheless increased transparency through improved direct participation and pathways for direct community engagement can improve compliance, improve decisions by being more inclusive, and increase the visibility of the work that is going on, and the visibility of those that are not present in the room. So why now? This is a really interesting question. It's affected by the increasingly dynamic geopolitical and environmental world, both at the global and at the Antarctic region level. The long-standing principle of Antarctic exceptionalism that has traditionally kept the Antarctic governance isolated, the idea that the continent should be remain shielded from what's going on in the rest of the world, that's starting to erode now. And Antarctic governance is being drawn increasingly into the broader currents of global political and economic engagement. And as noted earlier, the system is facing growing scrutiny and critique from the external world. So at the 2025 meeting of the Antarctic Treaty Consultative of the Antarctic Treaty, the Netherlands, Australia, and Republic of Korea submitted a working paper called Towards Enhanced Transparency and Engagement in the Antarctic Treaty System and the CEP. And it included several suggestions to improve engagement of stakeholders. It cited the absence of public sessions, the small list of invited stakeholders, and the limited information available to the general public about the discussions, and drew attention to other international bodies, particularly those with environmental responsibilities, that have become more proactive in encouraging active engagement. So bringing this to Kamala, if you look at this particular newspaper cutting here, all eyes are on Kamala meeting in Hobart. This referred to a recent meeting at Kamala, drawing attention to the perceived lack of progress on implementation of marine protected areas. And so we've been asking the question, is that actually the case? Are all eyes on Kamala? How visible are the discussions and outcomes made in Kamala to broader society? Are they visible enough? Is there a role for greater engagement for those not participating? And if so, how do we make this happen? But today we're just going to focus on the treaty meeting recommendations and consider how they might be relevant to Kamala. For our research design, we first reviewed the common practices in a sample of other international and regional regimes to identify best practice. And in the interest of time here, I'm not actually going to address that. We then reviewed a range of Kamala documents, reports, and participant lists to determine Kamala's current level of transparency, identified a number of criteria, including the number, the category, the access constraints, and the participant rules for invited observers, the number of public sessions, media and public accessibility to papers, discussions, and outcomes to determine current transparency levels. We then looked at those against the ATCM, so is Kamala doing better, worse, the same? And then we looked at the Antarctic Treaty Working Paper recommendations and assessed their applicability to Kamala. And in this, all we have done is to provide some additional thoughts at the end for going forward in terms of enhancing transparency. We would note at this point that the treaty meeting working paper recommendations were in fact written from an insider's perspective. So these are people that already have privilege of being party. So there is a significant part of that work that is not covered from our perspective. So what did we find, or what have we found thus far? Essentially, not surprisingly, we found that Kamala transparency indicators are fairly similar to those of the Antarctic Treaty. Expert organisations are routinely invited. Their delegations are not restricted in size, however, which is possibly a trade-off to limit the total number of conservation and industry organisations. Kamala tends to accept coalitions rather than individual organisation. Participation allows for the submission of background papers, making interventions, having those interventions included in the annual reports, and participating in informal groups and intersessional sessions, although of course they're not involved in decision making. Most applications for observer status have been accepted. The notable exceptions are Greenpeace and New Zealand High Seas Fishing Group, although there have been very few applications for observer status or expert status since the 90s. And there is a range of CAMLR publications that are available on the Secretariat website. One difference is that contrary to the treaty, working papers of CAMLR are not freely available to non-participants. Only some members make their papers available, and there's a very complex process for requesting access to those. In terms of inclusion of stakeholders, a small number of delegations do this, particularly for industry, and others could be encouraged to include such stakeholders, including academia and conservation groups. Looking at the ATCM working paper recommendations, we group those into three themes. So in terms of involvement of scientific, civil, environmental, and technical organizations, there is in CAMLR theoretically no barrier to invitations, although how you actually apply is a bit unclear. There's some clear gaps, including academic institutions, children and youth organizations, and those bringing different management or scientific thinking, such as Indigenous groups. And I've already noted stakeholders on delegations. Some delegations have, but not very many. With respect to media access and press conferences, briefings prepared for CAMLR have to be by consensus, so they tend to be very general, and we need some increased consideration of how to bring more informative information to the media and the general public. Public access without an intermediary is fairly limited at the moment, and there is definitely a role to
I'm sorry,
encourage
Linda, you
party-
have 1 minute to finish your
Yes, thank
presentation.
you. I will be finished in 1 minute. We certainly need to encourage more parties to voluntarily publish summaries and outcomes, and CAMLR could help that by providing more synopsis. So just to leave people with some thoughts from that so far, there are some relevant transparency measures already in place, but this may be because some of them are stronger in the ATCM because it maybe doesn't deal with resource extraction. Transparency at the moment tends to be tailored for those that are inside rather than those outside. Accessibility is a key component of transparency, so we need to be thinking about not just whether information is out there, but how easy it is to find and understand, and how do we engage and foster engagement while maintaining capacity for effective management decisions. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you very much, Linda. Now, finally, we close day 1 with the presentation of Elizabeth Lin, Emerging Trends in Antarctic and Southern Ocean Academic Publishing. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. And I'll just attempt to share screen. And you see that?
Yes, we can see your presentation and we can hear you clearly, Elizabeth.
Excellent, thank you. So thanks everyone for coming along, and I'd like to first of all acknowledge that I'm in Nipaluna, Hobart in Lutruwita, Tasmania, the traditional lands of the Muwinina and Palawa people, and I want to acknowledge them with deep respect. So this presentation is based on a report. It's led by the University of the Arctic, which is a big consortium of 200 institutions, in collaboration with the University of Tasmania, which is one of the UArctic members. And the research question for this report really was simply, what are the patterns and emerging trends in Antarctic and Southern Ocean academic publishing over roughly the last 9 years, not including this year. So why do this research? Well, determining scientific output is really essential for gauging the collective effort that humans are putting into understanding the Antarctic region. It can indicate a particular state's investment in the region, in research in the region, with a bit of lag. And it can also play quite an important part in political decision-making. As we know, scientific output is one of the bases for having consultative status, decision-making status in the ATCMs. So just a few words on methodologies before I get through to the findings. We used peer-reviewed publications as a proxy for scientific output. That's not the only measure, of course, but it's a widely accepted one. We also acknowledge that quality of research is quite important, and we'll get to that too. We used Scopus as our main data source. It's a multidisciplinary bibliographic database. It's a very big one. It indexes peer-reviewed literature, including journals, conference procedures, and books. It has a number of biases, which are limitations in our research. It is particularly poor in covering our disciplines, the Haas disciplines. It has a bias towards high-income countries and towards English language publications, and it prioritises journals over other forms of publication. And then we retrieved bibliographic records from Scopus and put them into SciVal, which is a web-based analytics platform that produces bibliometric indicators for research evaluation. And we use this to look at things like co-authorship and which nations were attached to particular publications. Our definition of Antarctic, this took a lot of discussion. It ended up being fairly inclusive, really, as inclusive as possible, incorporating the continent and its islands, the Southern Ocean and the subantarctic islands. And we used a search term, which I won't go into because it's complicated, but we borrowed it from a paper by Kevin Hughes and team, which was an analysis of Antarctic treaties' attainment of consultative status. And he, in turn, borrowed it from Gray, who presented a paper at the Polar Libraries Colloquium about the best bibliometric search term for Antarctic research. So we couldn't better that, so we used it. Importantly, we used what's called a fractional counting method when we counted things like authors and countries and institutions, where the credit for each of those is divided by the number of authors or countries or institutions attached to a particular publication. That's in contrast to a thing called full counting, which some other previous papers use. And we did an initial run with this query and this method, and then we selected 300 documents randomly, and we had 3 experts rate them on relevance to Antarctic and Southern Ocean research, which yielded a relevance precision of about 97%, which we were satisfied with. So moving on to the findings. So sort of headline one, I suppose, is the number of Antarctic and Southern Ocean publications by year, which, as you can see, began with a plateau, peaked up in 2021, and then has fallen ever since. There's something of a COVID effect, of course, going on here with 2020, there being very little field work, people sitting in their offices producing papers. But that's not clearly the whole story, because you can see there's been very little change between 2019 and 2024, and yet publication as a whole across the world has continued to go up in that time. So Antarctic and Southern Ocean, I'm going to use ASO to be quick. ASO publications have fallen as a percentage of total publications during that time. If we then look at publication by countries, and this is just over the more recent period of the last 3 years, we see that China has the highest numbers of publications in terms of quantity. We can see that almost all of these top 20 countries, we haven't included all of them, are consultative parties, with a couple of exceptions, Canada and Switzerland, for example. If we then take the top 6 countries and look at them over time, over the last 9 years, you can see what's behind that fall in publication output, because 5 out of those 6 countries have fallen, the big exception being China, which, as you can see, has a steep increase, taking over the US in 2022. Now, this is looking at quality, essentially, at top quartile publications. And we applied this to journals only. And the good news here is that the vast majority of Antarctic research is being published in Q1 and Q2 journals, which is good, but it's also not surprising given the amount of resources that countries put into Antarctic and Southern Ocean research. A lot of it requires field work and big logistics. If we look at countries over the last 9 years in terms of top quartile, we can see a pattern similar to the quantity pattern, with just a few differences. You can see there, again, the steep rise of China, but it crosses over the US in terms of quantity of top quartile publications only right at the end there in 2024. And this graph gives a sense both of quantity and quality of Q1s. So you can see how many Q1 publications are put out per country, and you can see what percentage of that country's outputs are Q1s. So the top 5 nations, for example, publish about 65% of their publications in Q1 journals. So they're putting out a lot of Q1s, and most of their publications they put out are Q1s. The exception is China. Only just over half of their publications are Q1s, but it's increasing, as we saw in the last graph. And we saw that countries like Switzerland and Finland publish really quite a high amount of their publications in Q1, 75%, although their overall publication is a lot smaller. But we see, for example, Russia, which is high in terms of quantity, being really quite low in terms of quality at 15%. So here we turned to looking at the kinds of topics that people focus on when they do Antarctic and Southern Ocean research. You can see that climate and climate change research are certainly the most prevalent: climate change, glacial maximum, carbon dioxide, climate modelling, etc. For us, quite interesting that the Haas disciplines are barely visible in this word cloud. If you look really carefully with the magnifying glass, you'll see words like sovereignty and international politics and China. Not clear whether China is kind of Haas word indicator. It could be part of a geopolitics discussion. Clearly, where the Haas disciplines do appear, it is in terms of things like law and international relations. And we did do an analysis of different fields and how much they produce in Antarctic research, but I don't have time to go through that here. So we also looked at institutions and which ones were producing the most Antarctic and Southern Ocean research. You can see the top 5 here. This is based on quantity. The British Antarctic Survey came out on top, followed by the Ministry of Natural Resources in China, the Russian Academy of Sciences, my own institution, University of Tasmania, and the Chinese Academy of Sciences. If we change that to the number of top quartile Antarctic publications, we've got a roughly similar list with a few changes. So British Antarctic Survey still comes out on top. Chinese Academy of Sciences is still there. University of Tasmania is still there. Ministry of Natural Resources in China still there. But Russian Academy of Sciences has disappeared, and we saw before the low quality of the Russian publications. And the Alfred Wegener Institute has jumped onto the list. Another thing that we looked at was international collaboration. So we looked at the number of publications per country that were the result of international collaboration in terms of co-authorship, and also the proportion of international collaboration per country. And this is over the last 3 years. And we list here only the top 20 countries. So the most collaborative proportionately on this measure are France, Canada, Norway, and the Netherlands. And the least are China, India, and Russia. It's quite possible, of course, that language barriers are a factor here. We also did a graphical illustration of international research collaboration. This was based on bilateral and trilateral co-authorship, so groups of 2s and 3s in terms of countries. And what you see in this diagram is the size of each circle representing the number of international collaborative articles published by that country. You can see the US is the biggest there. The width of the line connecting the circles indicates the volume of collaboration between those countries in terms of co-authorship. So you can see the US there with a big thick line to the UK, a fairly thick line to China, for example. And the distance between the circles indicates the relative intensity of the collaboration, so the relatively high number of joint publications for those countries. And that allows for different clusters of countries to be grouped together, and we've indicated that there with colours. So you can see there, obviously, that we've got, for example, on the right-hand side, we've got a group of Spanish-speaking and Portuguese-speaking countries in one cluster there. We've got some English-speaking countries up Australia, US, New Zealand, UK up there in the top left. So there's a whole lot more data in this work that I haven't got into in this short presentation. But if you're interested, please use that QR code there to go to our report, which is available as a preprint and gives all of these graphs and many more and a lot more detail. We're also in the middle of using the data we've generated to produce some peer-reviewed articles looking at particular aspects that come out of this data. But I thought it was quite useful for you to have this, this information from the report while it's fresh. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. We will now open the floor for questions.
Yes, Rupert, you can make your question.
Thank you. Good morning, Ellie. That was super interesting. With the impact of the Department of Government efficiency in the US and Donald Trump's stated policies, do you think that the status of the US as a major partner and publishing engine will decline?
That would certainly be my guess, Rupert. Our research doesn't cover that period, and it does show that there was already a significant decline in US output in research over those years, which we presume at this point was a product of decreasing investment. And certainly there's been articles in the media worrying about that. And one of the motivations really for doing this work was to indicate that there is a consequence to those sorts of decisions. And we are seeing essentially a change in global leadership in terms of Antarctic research. And that will probably translate into global leadership within the ATCM as well, eventually. And we certainly got some pushback from some people saying, oh, this is a terrible story, you shouldn't be putting this out there. But actually what we're trying to do is put a rocket up particular nations if they want to stay part of the conversation. And of course, there's no problem with a change in leadership. There's no problem with a huge country like China leading, as long as it's also leading environmentally, and we're not always seeing that. So for us, it's quite important to make transparent what investment decisions are producing in terms of output and making clear the consequences of that. So yeah, we're going to hopefully update this every year. So what I'm hoping is I'm not really hoping we'll see a decrease in research, but I'm hoping that the visibility of the impact of those decisions of the Trump administration will be something that will make, hopefully, the next administration think again.
Yes, Ursula?
You're on mute, Ursula.
Ursula, we can't hear you. Your microphone is not activated.
Okay, sorry for my voice, but I have the flu. What I wanted to ask, do you think that AI could help to overcome the language barrier, that it's so clustered in India, Russia, China, and yeah, what you showed in this slide? Because the language barrier maybe is that some research can be repeated.
I think that's highly likely, Ursula. Certainly in my own research, I'm using AI to access articles that I couldn't access earlier. So I'm guessing that would also happen in other kinds of research. It's probably going to be a few ethical issues and a few other issues that go along with that. But I do think that might help make a more level playing field for non-English speaking nations, which is one of the really positive things to come out of AI. Thanks for that idea.
Thank you.
And I've got a question for Lynn in the chat if there's no other questions.
Yes, there's a question for Lynn from
Sorry.
you, Elizabeth. Would you like to make the question for her?
I can.
Okay, sorry, I'm just reading it.
Yeah, I can speak it.
Yeah, no, I can read it. Thank you very much. I think that public opinion does have sway on decision makers, most decision makers. There are certainly some that ignore their public, as we know, but my own experience suggests that for democratic countries, at least, countries do take note of their public because they need to, particularly from an environmental perspective. And I believe that as the existential crisis continues and the Antarctic becomes more important as part of that solution, and also making it worse, the pressure from the public for the Antarctic Treaty System to be more engaged at global level will be strengthened. Sorry about my camera. My camera doesn't work very well on my computer. Does that answer your question? Katie might have a view too, and she's online.
Katie, would you like to add some comment?
Sure, hang on. Hi team, how's it going? Thanks Lynn for pretty much covering up on what I would have said as well. I think the thing I'd add is that public engagement, Lynn's alluded to a growing environmental crisis and how that may change the relationship that regimes like Kamala need to have with the public. I think we can see preemptive public engagement and increasing transparency and engagement at this stage as a future-proofing device for the event later on, where we ask members of the public to make larger changes in their lives based on the unfolding environmental crisis in the polar regions. Let's look at something like public health as a corollary. The COVID crisis asked a number of things of members of the public, and the way that was communicated, the way that people were involved in decision-making and deliberation and discourse had a marked impact on what happened in terms of public response. Climate change will ask similar levels of, it will ask big things of us. So I think if we want to have people on board with the things that we ask, we need to start engaging now. Hope that's clear.
Yeah, you're definitely preaching to the converted here. It's just, I always find that, when I bring this up to people who are involved in the decisions, they look at me like I'm incredibly naive to think that the public could ever make any kind of change.
Yeah, I think that's part of what we need to change. And certainly many international organizations are starting to realize that if public stakeholders are engaged in their decision forming, they have stronger decisions and stronger ownership generally. But of course, there are also countries that will always ignore their public. And, we just work around that, don't we? Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess if I could add one more thing and just jump onto my soapbox, we as a sector need to really create a space for and start valuing the study of engagement as its own discipline. So unless we understand how people think, feel, and act about Antarctica, we won't be able to deploy targeted engagement strategies. So I think that's a big thing on the to-do list for Antarctic research.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much, Linda, Katie, and of course, Elizabeth. Diego?
Okay, thank you all for your questions and participation. This concludes the first day of our live broadcast on Channel 1. The channel is now signing off. We invite you all to see the pre-recorded presentations which are available in the SCAR YouTube channel and the conference website. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.